Welcome into episode 48 of the Josh Hendrickson Show. I'm Neal McCready, joined as always by the chair of economics at the University of Mississippi, Josh Hendrickson. Josh, how are you?
Doing well.
Shad White, state auditor for the state of Mississippi, will join us somewhere in the next 30 minutes, maybe a little before that, but he's going to join us. So we'll kill a little time, tell some stories. I'm in a celebratory mood today. I'm in a celebratory mood. I'm still so proud of our country. I thought last week it was incredible on the 249 and a half anniversary of basically telling King George, no mas. People took their Saturday afternoon all over the country, and they got together again to send yet another message to Great Britain. Just in case.
Yeah.
Just in case you didn't get the last one. Just in case Cornwallis's surrender wasn't enough. We told King Charles, no, we're not coming back. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. Don't even think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, they just, I don't blame them. You look at the royal family, they've just gotten worse over the years.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean,
totally out of control.
Yeah. You got to take to the streets, and you've got to just, sometimes you got to tell the British royal family, like, you're welcome in our tabloids. You're not welcome in our country.
I asked some people, I said, what exactly are we protesting here? And they said, well, the NBA season starts on Tuesday, and the Sacramento Kings suck.
Yeah.
And the management's been terrible. They've assembled a roster that makes no sense at all in a loaded Western Conference. You've got the Thunder, the Rockets, the Nuggets, the Clippers, the Mavericks. You have all these teams, even teams like, Memphis, the Lakers, that they have pulses. You can see, like, okay, there's a plan there. Not the Kings. No plan. And so that was the people of America saying no Kings.
Yeah.
Even the Los Angeles Kings, once a proud hockey franchise. A proud hockey franchise. Wayne Gretzky played for the Los Angeles Kings.
Yeah.
No more.
No.
And so people just, I love it. We have a country that is built on chasing excellence. And we don't let our vanquished foes forget.
Yeah.
And we hold our sports teams responsible for their, I don't know, what's the word? Competency. Competent. We expect competency. And when the Kings don't have it, we say no to the Kings.
You got to respect it. I mean, when it's time for contraction, it's time for contraction. If the league needs to shrink, it needs to shrink. And
you know where to start.
Yeah, you start with the worst run franchises and get rid of them. We're not gonna tolerate that.
Is it coincidence that I was in Athens? And I kid you not, as I say this, as we shift towards the serious part of the No Kings Saturday. Thought the juxtaposition of the following was amazing. I'll tell you about my traffic experience momentarily, because I think it is a national crisis, if we're being honest. But for the moment, I had one hell of a traffic experience throughout the day Friday. I was staying in what's the name of the town? It's about 30 minutes away. I don't know. Beautiful hotel. And I said, well, it's been a minute since I've been to Athens. I've got to get on Lumpkin Street to get to the Lumpkin's where all the bars and stuff are. And so I was like, I'm going to go early. Get parked. I can walk around. I'd rather do that than sit in traffic for 3 hours. So I did. I left my hotel in Brazelton, Georgia, and I drove to Athens. And I found I was parked in the south deck there at the University of Georgia campus. And I got to that pretty quickly. But as I was getting into town, I saw the beginnings. Now, I'm sure this turned into one heck of a party. But I saw the beginnings of the No Kings protest. The people were all of the same persuasion. They were all white. They all were old. I'm one to talk about hair. You're one to talk about hair. But when most of the people have a hair color that requires an artificial dye, I judge. So there was that. And then, literally a mile later, I'm on the University of Georgia campus, the big game, Ole Miss, Georgia, 2 top 10 teams. College game day was there. Nick Saban, Kirk Herbstreit's dog, James Franklin, everybody, the whole shooting match. There was a much larger party there. There were people hanging around. just, you know, enjoying a nice Saturday, getting ready for a day of college football at Sanford Stadium. 92,000 strong, very loud. Someone said they piped the noise in. I'm like, I don't know, man. It was really loud. And I think it was legit. One party looked sort of like what you'd expect in America on a Saturday. Tailgates, beers. I had people stop me. They didn't know who I was, but just hello. I was kind of lost a little bit when I got out of the parking garage. I'm like, is the stadium that way? And the guy was like, no, it's that way. And then I got offered a beer a couple of times. One nice lady asked me if I was hungry. I was not, but it was very nice of her to offer. A good time appeared to be had by most, as opposed to the No Kings protest that was protesting the Sacramento Kings and the fact that they have built a team that makes no sense at all.
I mean, it's amazing that in Athens they were so passionate about the Sacramento Kings. Like, I mean, it just really is a testament to the reach of the NBA.
It is.
And
it is, because you would think that was Hawks territory.
Well, and the other thing is I was a little concerned actually about this protest when I heard about it because, I knew the NBA connotations and I thought maybe like people just wanted LeBron to retire. And
That's
I was
true.
like,
That's true.
I mean, King is just his nickname. It's not his real.
He didn't play
It's
last
not
night.
an official title.
He did not play last night. He's got sciatica.
Maybe he's feeling the pressure.
Well, you wonder if it's a CIA operation.
I mean, you wonder. You never know.
What do you make of those assemblies? I mean, look, you have the right to peacefully assemble in our country. You have the right to peacefully protest. From all accounts, most of the protests were peaceful. I did love some of the coverage where people asked, "What are you protesting?" And there really is no answer. What is the president doing specifically that is akin to being a monarch? It's a difficult answer to come up with. But again, I mean, assemble and protest if you like, if that's how you like to spend your Saturday. I did wonder what you thought of it as you watched it unfold all over the country.
Well, there's a couple things. Number one is I just wish these people had grandchildren that they could spend time with instead of, worrying about, the future king. I mean, I joke, but I do mean this. I do think a lot of the reason why you have, a lot of like older white protesters is that they have children who are, getting started in life later on. They're not, getting married as early. They're not buying houses as early. They're not having children as early. And I do think that, if they just had something better to do, like play with their grandchildren, I think that would make it less likely. But I also think this is partly generational. Is like what you have to understand is that a lot of these people, like they came out of this, they came out of sort of like the protest culture, of the 60s.
Oh yeah,
and like that sort of gave them a lot of meaning. And I think like, I mean, we've talked about this many times. I think that one of the big problems on the left is the left has become very secular over time. And as they become secular, like, I mean, you lose meaning, right? Like, where do you find meaning? If you don't, and unfortunately, it seems like a lot of these people find their meaning in the political process, and the political process is so important to them that this is the most important thing that they could be doing. And I do think so. So I think it's a matter of, hey, like, maybe they wouldn't be doing this if they had more grandchildren, which maybe we should ask why that is. And then the other thing is, I think they come out of the protest culture. But then I also think that, that side of the aisle, they have, they lack meaning. Like, I mean, that's the thing is that the thing that cracked me up about this is what I thought was the funniest aspect of this. So there's this, there was guidance set to Democrats abroad. And they said, if you're abroad, we're not going to call it a No Kings protest. We're going to call it a No Tyrants protest because some of the people, you might be in a country where they still have a king. And, we don't want to, we don't want to make this about that. So we're going to call it No Tyrants instead. And I was like, no, hold on. Like, the No Kings thing is like so it's like we want no kings, but we also want to be inclusive of people who do want a king. Like they can't help
Except
themselves.
those kings.
Yeah, they can't. they can't help themselves. And it's kind of like, no. Like actually, that was kind of what the American Revolution was about. And so I don't. It's just such a bizarre thing. And I think, look, I think a lot of what it is, like, frankly, the fact that it's a bunch of older people who are out there doing it, I actually think that just this reflects, it reflects a sort of defeat. Like it's like these are not, there's no momentum behind them. Like it takes organization. There's organization behind it. There's,
Yeah.
there's people putting money behind it. There's people who putting resources behind it, but there's no enthusiasm, right?
No.
Like it's not attracting people. Like it's not attracting people to come out and do it. Like, I mean, you look at the crowd and it's not a crowd that seems, like motivated and excited for change, right? Like,
I mean, truly, the juxtaposition from this assembly to this assembly in less than a mile, probably. I was trying to figure out where I was. I knew I was getting close to Lumpkin, so I was paying a lot of attention to it. It might have been half a mile, no more than a mile, and you just go, wow, there's quite the contrast.
well,
here.
and there's no there's no central motivating factor for like why they're out there. It's just this like generic, like, we don't like Trump thing. And it's just kind of like, first of all, in the first term, they had a lot of sympathetic people who wouldn't even vote for the same person as them, right? Like they had a lot of sympathetic people who are just kind of like, I don't like him either, kind of people. The issue this time around is that the circumstances have changed significantly, right? Like I think that the experience with the Biden administration really revealed to a lot of people like where we are as a country. And it also just revealed, like, I mean, I think, look, the one thing that I heard them talk about that actually like was of substance was like the stuff about immigration. But the thing is that like what they would say are things like, you know, this is not this is not part of like a country like this. This is not like what democratic societies do. Like they don't go around and round people up and like deport them. And it was sort of like, well, you know what else? Like democracies don't do? Like they don't just like allow 20 million people into the country when that was never sort of the stated policy or voted on or whatever, and then tell people that, well, there's nothing we can do to stop this. Like, and well, we'll have to have some kind of legislation or we'll have to do something about it. And then literally you get a new president and it's just like, oh, nope, nobody's crossing the border anymore. And it's like, okay, so the issue is that even on the issue where they seem to have some like, motivation behind it, like the messaging like falls flat, right? Like, yeah, you can get some people, you can get some people who are going to say, yeah, maybe like they're being too aggressive, or maybe they must be picking up some people by mistake and all these kinds of things. And like, that's bad or whatever. But like for the most part, the thing is it's like, no, like we lived through the last 4 years. The last 4 years was like it was some combination of like malice and incompetence. And that's why there's no motivation behind this, because the people in large part, that's what these people are standing up for, is like, these are proud. This is Joe Biden's wheelhouse. Like these aren't just Democrats. Like these are like Joe Biden Democrats. Right. And the thing is like, that was a colossal failure. It was certainly the worst administration of my lifetime. Like certainly the worst administration of my lifetime. But it also was, again, it was complete chaos. It seemed like nobody was in charge. Everything that they were doing, you're wondering, like, are they doing this because they hate the rest of us, or are they doing this because like they're just incompetent? Like you had to ask yourself questions like that, because they're not responsive to anybody. They're not responsive to voters. They weren't responsive to demands. They were kind of just doing whatever it is that they wanted to do. and they were bad at all of it. And so I think that's the problem, is that like those people who are out there, they're largely out there like sort of like, hey, like we could be living in the second Biden administration right now. And it's just like there's no market for that. Like people, people don't want that.
So can I tell you about my experience on Saturday? My Friday. I was driving to Georgia. I was getting off of 22 in Birmingham onto 65 to get to 20. Shad's here. State Auditor Shad White joins us on the Josh Hendrickson Show. Shad, how are you?
What's up, guys? How are y'all doing?
I got to hear you a little better. Let's see. Hold on. Can you try without the AirPods? Sometimes those throw it off. If you go to a different,
How's that?
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, I don't know why. For some reason, Ecamm and AirPods sometimes get along great, and sometimes they're cats and dogs. And so
Not friends. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Well, we're here now. That's all that counts.
I finished telling my story real fast. I was going I got into Birmingham, and I'm in, 65's 5 lanes, and it's, it's a speedway. It's Talladega weekend, which was fitting. It felt like Talladega where I was. And I was not terribly far behind a giant 18-wheeler. And I'm in a F-150, Clark Ford F-150, 662-257-1900s. If you're not driving a Clark Ford, you should be. And I'm so glad at this moment that I'm driving an F-150, because I kid you not, I notice in the road there are smoking hunks of metal that are in my lane. There's a car to my left. There's a car to my right. Swerving around the metal is not an option at this moment. And so luckily I'm doing the mental math, and I'm like, well, my truck's high enough that we'll go over these hunks of metal. And I'm really focused on the metal, and I look up and the truck has stopped. I didn't say slowed down. Stopped in the middle lane. I'm obviously here. I wondered, there were 3 or 4 seconds there where I said, well, this is going to be a hell of a way to end it. This is not how I sort of envisioned it. We all sort of envision being old men laying on our deathbeds with our wives holding our hands and our children telling us how great we were as fathers, and we just drift off into a peace. And I thought, this is not going to be peaceful. This is probably going to really hurt. But anyway, he just stopped, and there was chaos behind me. I don't know what subsequently happened. I got around it and just went on and said a quick prayer for everyone that was back there and hope nobody got hurt. But this is a we're going to get Shad. Shad, you weigh in on this. This is a major problem for our country, and you notice it when you drive on the interstates, is we've got an influx of truck drivers that don't know how to drive trucks.
Yeah.
And I was able to get, I've got to drive to Oklahoma City tomorrow, Ole Miss and Oklahoma on Saturday, and I'm going on Thursday. It's 8 hours on I-40 and certainly from Memphis to Little Rock, it's a hellscape of trucks. That's all. Once you get through about Conway, it's not so bad, but it's that area where they're going, they're trying to get to Dallas and Houston, and it's all converging right there. Nightmare. And it's been that way, but gentlemen, I would submit, and there's documentation to support this, that this is becoming a major problem. That there's fewer qualified drivers, and some of the people who are driving these trucks, they're obviously illegals. They're living in their trucks, and I don't think they can speak the language. I don't think they can read the road signs, and I don't think there's a major degree of care either.
No, I totally agree. And y'all are clearly following this issue with non-citizen drivers too. So I don't know how much you covered before I got here, but back during the Biden administration, they basically told states in a letter, look, we know it's illegal for somebody to be driving an 18-wheeler and not speak English, but we are effectively not going to enforce that law. And so most states also followed suit and they stopped enforcing that law. So what should happen is if you're a non-citizen driving an 18-wheeler and you get pulled over, or you go into a weigh station and a state trooper starts asking you questions and you can't read or speak English, they should put your truck out of commission and you should not be allowed to drive that truck away. So under the Biden administration, they basically stopped enforcing that law. And then they went out and they started bragging about how many new truck drivers there were on the roads during this period. I mean, they literally pulled an 18-wheeler onto the lawn of the White House and did a big press conference where they were bragging about this. And the argument at the time was, well, our distribution network it's in need of drivers. More people are buying stuff online after COVID. And so we got to have all these new drivers. And then as we found out later, a lot of those new drivers were just non-citizens who could not read or speak English, and they were a menace on the road. And so you can scroll through these Twitter accounts that track this stuff of these horrific wrecks. Some of them in Mississippi, Collins, Mississippi, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where 18-wheeler drivers are killing people. And so the Trump administration came in and they undid that guidance. So Sean Duffy at Transportation undid that guidance and said, no, if you're a non-English speaker and you're driving one of these trucks, it is current law that you should not be allowed to remain in commission if somebody catches you doing this. And I'll just tell you, I heard from friends of the industry. I heard from smaller and mid-sized trucking company owners. They were very quick to say that some of the bigger trucking companies, they were adamantly opposed to the Trump administration doing this, probably because they have come to rely on cheap non-citizen labor. You even see some states like New York, they're issuing commercial CDLs with no name on them. So that driver will drive through a state like Oklahoma and get picked up by a trooper, and they'll see a CDL and it has no name. It just has the picture of the person, and clearly these states are just handing these out like candy. So this has got to stop. This is, I just think, a menace to normal families who are out there driving around, and all of us are trying to go see family in Atlanta or go see a ball game in Oklahoma. It's a huge deal. It's a huge deal.
When when this first came to my attention was like shortly after COVID, I had these reporters that were calling me and they were saying like, can you talk to us about this like trucking recession? And I was very confused when they brought this up because I was like, what do you mean trucking recession? Like we're just coming out of a pandemic. Like there's like as many loads as you can possibly want to haul. Like this should be like the most amazing time in the world. And they're like, yeah, but like we're talking to all these truck drivers and they say that like they can't, they can't make a living. And like that they're not, like they're struggling to keep, to keep going. And as you kind of like, and as you dug into this, people had all kinds of convoluted reasons for why this was the case. But I mean, even we had a guy who reached out to us, and that was another story. We had a guy reach out to us and told us about this.
Yeah.
And told us this was going on. And then when I tried to look into it, like I was asking people questions, because if you go to like the state departments of transportation, you can see how many CDLs and things they're giving out. And the numbers were ridiculous. Like they were orders of magnitude difference. Like it's like they like a state that typically gives like that like renews like 200 a month or something like that. Like 1 month they had recorded like that they had done like 2,000 or something, right?
Yeah,
it would just be
times 20.
Yeah, it would just be 10 or 20 times what they were normally doing. And then then even when I would ask people about this, the ridiculous answer that I would get is they would say stuff like, well, Amazon's got a lot of trucks now. And I'm like, no, Amazon doesn't. Like, they don't have 10 times as many trucks as everybody
it's not
else.
how it works.
That ain't it.
Yeah. So I know you've had a lot of interesting things in your job going on here lately. And I know one that Josh is probably quite interested in, given he works in a university environment, is you had a report this week that was released about university tenure reform.
Yeah.
What
can
you tell us about that?
Quick 2 seconds on that, and just more in general on universities. I mean, in general, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars on our universities. And so it's part of my role as state auditor to make sure we're getting a good return on any big expenditure of taxpayer dollars. So we did this study on tenured professors, and unfortunately, at most of our universities, tenured professors are, of course, being paid more than non-tenured professors, but they are working in terms of teaching. They're teaching less, and so then we start asking, well, what are tenured professors doing if they're not teaching as much or more than non-tenured professors? And the answer is always, well, tenured professors should be doing research and they should be doing community service and service to the administration. But again, unfortunately, our university system does not actually track the amount of research or community service that professors are doing. So this was kind of another report that we published to raise this issue of ROI at our universities. To me, really the big issue at our universities is we have to do some really tough questioning when it comes to where our dollars are going and whether or not they're going to degree programs that actually prepare kids to do real jobs. And what we see in other states is those states, over 30 now, have reformed the way they fund their universities to try to funnel money to high value degree programs. And in Mississippi, when you raise this as a topic, everybody comes after you. So I started talking about this about a year ago, and Marshall Ramsey drew a cartoon of me, telling kids what they ought to major in and banging on administrators' windows. And, it's anathema around here to talk about it, but every other state, or not every other state, most other states are reforming their universities to try to make them job growth engines, basically, and prepare the thinkers and the leaders of tomorrow. And we're not doing enough on that front. And so I'm going to continue talking about the ROI at our universities and what we need to change.
How do you do that?
On the funding
if someone gave you full control and you were able to really do it where it made sense, how would you? What would it look like?
I think what you would do is something similar to what the Trump administration is actually doing right now through their One Big Beautiful Bill. So what they said is, look, we need to look at these majors and we need to look at which kids go on to earn good salaries and are able to live a good, meaningful life. And we're going to dump more money into those majors. And if you've got kids that are going and majoring in gender studies and they can't make money after that, well, guess what? We're just not going to federally subsidize those majors. Now, if you want to go use your tuition dollars to pay for that, or a donor wants to pay for you to go get that degree, have at it. Free country, nobody's going to stop you. So that's what the Trump administration is doing through the One Big Beautiful Bill. I think the state could just copy that model and say, we're going to do basically the same thing with state dollars. On top of that, though, Neal, I think what you need to do is you need to continue to look at university departments that are controversial and not productive for the university. So I've talked ad nauseum for the last 3 years about our DEI office at multiple universities. Those are just massive wastes of taxpayer dollars. So millions and millions of dollars over the course of the last few years have gone to these DEI offices. Those just need to go away. And if you look at other states like North Carolina, they eliminated their DEI offices in their university system, and they took the dollars that they were spending on it and instead dumped it into campus police, which is, a mind-blowing, unthinkable thing here in Mississippi, but it is just common sense. It would actually make our campuses safer for the students there. Parents would be more comfortable sending their kids there. It would be a value add for the universities. Those are two ways I would start.
Yeah, I mean the biggest problem is is entrenched interests. What if I told you? By the way,
I can sort of feel the heat coming off of you from over there.
What if I told you that? What if I told you that there's a department buying majors? Anyway, Neal knows what I'm talking about. There's
literally, it's true.
But no, so this is a fundamental problem. Is there's this really weird thing. So I think that people don't really realize sort of the nature of how things change over time. Because a lot of the arguments that I hear on campus, is the value is the college education is and it's sort of the value is sort of the sort of well-roundedness that you get, right? Your exposure to all these ideas. And now here's the deal. I want people to be exposed to lots of different ideas. I want them to be well-rounded when they leave. But the issue is that, if you were going to college in 1950, you could probably major in anything. And then that college degree would convey a lot of value when you went on the job market because there just weren't very many of you. And the thing is that over time, as more and more people start to go to college, because like what it was providing from you then is it wasn't so much about like what you were majoring in, and it wasn't about what you were majoring in because the college degree itself was rare enough
it was
that
it was a distinction,
right? It
right.
signaled to people that like this is a person who has a certain level of intelligence, this is a person who can finish things that they start,
a level of commitment, right,
like all that kind of thing. But the thing is like as more and more people go to college, well, that the signal that's being provided by that college degree is getting, lower and lower over time because, well, if 10% of the population has a college degree, obviously it's going to have a lot more value than if like 70% of the population has a college degree, right? Because it went from something that really differentiated you from everybody else to something that really doesn't differentiate you from a lot of people now. And so what has happened, right, is that people like employers and things like that, like it's not as important like that you have a college degree. It's like, what is that degree in? Right. Because just having the degree is not providing the signal that it used to. And so now it's sort of like, well, what did you study when you were there? And there's this sort of
a degree at Ole Miss in accounting has a far different value. I mean, if we're just being honest, than a degree from Ole Miss in sociology. I'm not picking on sociology for any particular reason, other than if my child graduates from the University of Mississippi with a degree in accounting, he or she is going to get a job. Probably going to have people competing for him or her.
Yep.
Not so much in sociology, unless it's, hey, we've got a shortage of baristas here, and we need somebody to fix a cappuccino. I'm just being serious. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, I remember
Neal, you said you weren't going to pick on sociologists. Here we are.
And I lied. I apologize. I walked into this trying not to, but here we are.
You're right. I mean, and the data bear that out. You can look at what sociology majors go and do, and they don't stay in Mississippi because there's not a lot of sociology jobs. There's not a lot of anthropology jobs in Mississippi, but those kids graduate with those degrees and they leave the state. So we've invested in them, and then they go somewhere else and they can't get a job in those cities. So they go be baristas in Atlanta. And that's not doing a service to those kids because they were told, just go major in something and get your degree. And Josh is 100% right. You find out the bad news at the end of the process when you've got a degree that's not useful. I totally agree with what Josh said. And I also think this, you've got some people who will say, well, okay, I get what you're saying, but I want to be well-rounded. This is a time to read and to learn and think deeply. You can still do that and still major in something that is actually going to get you a job at the end of it. You don't have to major in German literature. Like, you can minor in German literature. You can major in accounting, and you can take some German literature classes. Like, there's a ton of resources at universities that can make you a well-rounded person, but you can also make a financially smart decision. And again, like, it's not just your money that's at stake. Yeah, you might take on debt to get this education, but at public universities in Mississippi, we, the taxpayers, are helping to fund your degree. We would like to get something back for it. And the something back is typically some percentage of students who graduate who can be productive members of society in jobs here, back in Mississippi. That's the ideal end state for at least some of our graduates.
Well, and that's the other issue too, is that it's also not just an issue of undergrad programs. Like, the other thing is like that people have to look at as graduate programs. So there are a bunch of graduate programs. I mean, it's easy to look up. I don't have to name them. I don't want to create any more enemies. If you look up these, but I mean, you can look up the programs. Like, there are certain programs where, they're producing hundreds of PhDs a year. And like the only real job available to somebody with a PhD in that field is like a job as a professor somewhere. And the jobs available are a small fraction of like the number of PhDs that are produced. Well, that just tells you right there that like the very best people are going to get those jobs. And then the other people, they're going to have to find something else to do. Well, you just went through a PhD program, right? So like, that's not, that's not ideal, right? I mean, and that's my concern is, look, if somebody wants to do that and they want to do that, if they want to go, through a program like that, knowing that it might not improve their job prospects, like, I don't have a problem with them doing that. But the question is like, who's paying for it? And then also, are they being told up front about what the job prospects are. Like, do they have like a reasonable kind of idea about what the job market's going to be like when they
in
finish?
many cases, and I won't go into the specifics here because I don't want to make any more enemies either. I have my share, and we should all try to get along, right? There are a couple of majors that the kids aren't finding out until like Shad said, they're not finding out until the very end. That, oh, wait a minute, there are no jobs, and it's a massive field. Like when I say massive field, there's tons of kids in that department.
Yeah.
And so, to me, it's borderline criminal that those kids get in that thinking that they're getting a degree in something, only to find out at the very end when they start seeking a professional job, the employer says, "But you don't have any experience in this in the curriculum in this field of expertise, and you're losing out to kids who went to other schools that actually got degrees in that actual field." I mean, you can name something, but it doesn't mean that it's actually that.
Yeah,
I'm not articulating really as well as the two of you, but I'm trying to intentionally not use a word.
I'll be the guy who names some of the majors. That's fine. I'll give you an example of a conversation I had, and this was with a university president in Mississippi. And I appreciated his candor, at least in this moment. He told me, he said, "Shad, I need as many kids as possible to go into anthropology as I can get." And I said, "Why?" I think I know the answer, but why? And he said, "Well, they're cheap to educate. I mean, the professors, the anthropology professors, they can't go get another job somewhere else. So I don't have to pay them all that much. And really all I have to do is furnish a classroom and, desks. And that's it. That's an anthropology class. And it's much more expensive to hire a mechanical engineering professor. They can go into the private sector and make much more money. The labs for some of these high demand majors are expensive. So it costs me a ton of money to finance those degree programs. And I asked him, what are all these kids who graduate with these anthropology degrees going to do when they finish? And his answer was, that's not my problem. My mission is to create this learning environment where everybody can explore what they want to explore. And I just told him, respectfully, I disagree with that. It is your problem because you get money from the state and you're supposed to be producing some outcome for the state. And also, it is your problem because you're setting these kids up for failure. They're going to find out, just like you said, Neal, they're going to find out at the end of their degree that there's not enough jobs for them. And then what do they do, especially if they've taken on debt? And I think it's even worse, Josh, with some of these master's degree programs and PhD programs. There's basically been almost no oversight over this over the course of the last few years. So our IHL board that runs the universities, they've greenlit, the masters in social work. And maybe there's a demand for that out there, but if you dig into what that person is learning, some of the tenets are just bizarre. It's like, we're going to teach you how to be advocates for undocumented immigrants, and that's what we're paying for. That's what we're paying for as taxpayers. And then people go get that master's, they take on debt to do it, and then they either have a job doing a thing that we might not want them to do, or they don't have a job at all. Either way, it's a bad outcome.
Well, we also have to do something about. There's a it's like what I call like the circular economy of waste. Okay. So like what's happening is that what happens is we've got these accreditation agencies, and the accreditation agencies, a lot of what they do is like they're just giving you busy work to do to prove that like you're doing, something of value. But oftentimes like you're not even proving that you're doing something of value. Like you're just like checking boxes. Like, yes, we did this, we did this, we did that. Like it's not like a lot of times these things are only like tangentially related to academic outcomes. But then what happens is because of all of these conditions that are put on like accreditation, then you have to have people on staff at the university who do nothing but like, invest in compliance and, and enforcement of all of these things, and go around to these departments like, hey, I need you to produce a report on this. I need you to tell me about this. I need you to tell me about that. And like some of the things are valuable, but some of the things, honestly, like you could just pull out of a database, right? Like some of the things, like we shouldn't have to have an entire office that does this. Like you could just like, how many, like there's a database that says like how many majors in each, like how many people are in each major. Right. And so you can actually just pull that out of the database. Like it shouldn't require all of this extra work to do those things. But what happens is then the issue is that you need people to populate these offices and run these offices, and sort of the conditions that they put on this is like, oh, it needs to be somebody who has experience in academia. And so what happens is you have these fields that are producing people with PhDs and they can't get academic jobs, but then they go and they get a job running this office that handles accreditation, right? And then the entire staff is just staffed with people who are, you know, overqualified to do that job because they have PhDs in fields where they otherwise can't get a job. But then they're like, but all they're doing is like compliance with accreditation and all these things. But so what's happening is like, if you think about it from the taxpayer's perspective, you're paying for this accreditation office. Those people never have any contact with a student ever, right? So right there, like that's inflating the tuition cost because like the university has to pay for that. Somebody has to pay for it, right? So it's either state appropriations or tuition that's going to have to pay for that office. They never interact with a student, so that they don't generate revenue, right? It's not as though you're paying this cost and then, you know, but you're bringing in all this revenue. Then the other thing is that, because you have those offices, you need people to populate those offices. Well, because these are not really desirable jobs, but you need academic experience, you got to go out and you got to find people who have like masters or PhDs or something like that to come and run these offices. But the people who have a master's or a PhD in a field where, you know, they can get really good jobs, like they don't want a job like that. And so what ends up happening is like that whole accreditation system then supports these programs that otherwise would not have graduate programs because some of their graduates aren't even being funneled into their field. They're just being funneled into this sort of like accreditation system. But so you've got this kind of like circular economy here where like they're like, well, our grads are getting jobs at universities. Okay, but they're not academic jobs at universities. Like they're doing like accreditation. But then the accreditation creates this cost. Then this cost is used to then further subsidize these departments where people can't get jobs because, well, we need funding for these students to get these degrees, and then they get those degrees and then they funnel them into these jobs that really shouldn't exist. And then so you have this you just have this circular economy of waste where it's just like we're spending $1 so that we can allocate it to this wasteful thing. And because we're allocating this $1 to this wasteful thing, then we need to invest in these programs that will produce people who can then come work for the, you know, and it's not, you just, when you see it from the inside, it's just completely ridiculous. Like there's too much like box checking to comply with things where there's not where there's nothing on the other side of that box. It's just kind of like do these things and that will demonstrate to us that like you have a good program, and then you do those things, and then you know you get reaccredited or whatever. But then you have to have this entire staff of people who are nonstop like keeping up with the rules and updating the checklist and checking and making sure all the boxes are checked and all these kinds of things. And but that's not contributing at all whatsoever to people's educational experience. I mean, I say this all the time and I know that it sounds like ridiculous, but if no one, I've never in my 15 years at Ole Miss, I've never had a student say, well, I came here because you guys are accredited. Like, and I know that's, I get like, I'm being a little facetious when I say that, but I do
I bet they'll yell that in Norman, Oklahoma this weekend. Yeah, they'll be part of
it. and I think, but I think that's the issue, right? Is that
whoever loses will say we're more accredited than
we're accredited, guys.
But I think that's the thing is that, you know, yeah, like if you're like a new university or something, yes, there should be some kind of accreditation process, like if you're getting started. But like once you're started and you have some kind of reputation, like it should actually be really, really easy to determine whether or not you're producing something of value. But it's a testament to kind of just how universities work in general, which is like they don't rely on actual feedback mechanisms, like how many majors are being drawn into this field, or like how many, like what's happening with our enrollment. Like those are the relevant things. Like if you were running this as a private business, that's all you would care about. Is like, are we attracting students? Are they, you know, are they going, what majors are they going into? Are they getting jobs? Are they telling other people about us? Right. That's what you would evaluate. Instead, it's just a bunch of like box checking and arbitrary things.
Josh, that's in the military. That's what we call a self-licking ice cream cone. That's what you call that. Can I ask you though, like, what would you say is the answer to that? Is it reform of the accreditation process to make that either simpler or more responsive to the actual needs of the students as opposed to just a giant compliance checklist? What's the fix?
Yeah, I think it has to start there because I think like like universities are in a tough spot because I think like they have no choice but to do this stuff because they're dealing with the accreditation agencies. And I think that they're I think,
in other words, if you don't do those things, you don't get your funding.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that I think probably what we need more competition for accreditation, right? There's not that many accreditation agencies to begin with, right? So if you had greater competition, they would be trying to figure out ways to do this more effectively because they could offer you a product that's actually like they could come in and say, look, those other people, they're going to make you do a bunch of work. You're not going to learn anything about what you're doing. With us, it'll be much simpler. And, but you'll feel confident and so people would actually move to that. The problem is we don't have enough competition. But then also, it's these processes is that the processes are so antiquated. Like what it reminds me of kind of is like the analogy I usually give is like the public school system. Like the issue with the public school system is like, it's not like a company. So you don't know, like, Kroger knows if they're doing a bad job because fewer people are coming to Kroger, fewer people are buying groceries there, right? But with a public school, like some people are leaving because they're unsatisfied, but some people can't afford to leave. And so they stick around, but that's not a testament to how good you're doing. That's just they have no better option, right? And I think, but so how do they deal with that? The way that they deal with that is they say, okay, well, what we'll do is like we'll test our students, because if our students do well on the test, that will show that they're learning something. Of course, the problem is then you introduce the test and then everybody just starts focusing on teaching the test so that they get good scores. And so then the test sort of becomes kind of meaningless. And that's kind of what the accreditation agencies are like. It's sort of like, well, how do we evaluate this? Well, we'll come up with these metrics to evaluate it, but then everybody knows those are the metrics. And so then they're maximizing the metrics without thinking about whether or not what those metrics are measuring still has any value. And so you just get bogged down in this never-ending like bureaucratic process of trying to evaluate yourself to determine whether you're doing a good job. And it's like, okay, but markets take care of this, right? Like markets give you feedback and signals, and like we don't use any of that. Like when we're doing these evaluations, like it's based on a lot of bump.
I think you unplugged. There you go. There you go.
There we go. Just talking with my hands.
You're doing Nick Saban, where you do this thing constantly.
I thought you cursed and Neal bleeped you. That's what I thought happened. I thought the F-bomb started dropping, and Neal was like,
"No, that's the Tyler Siskey show. We're good. We're good.
Family-friendly show."
Hey, I've got a couple things I want to get to, but there's a couple people in the stream that want me to ask you a couple of things, Shad. Chauncey wants to know if we'll ask you if the new 5th tier for PERS will cause more difficulty in hiring new potential employees, and can you explain why PERS is underfunded and what reforms can happen to fix it?
Yeah, it's a good question, and my short answer is I think the jury's still out, basically. So back up a little bit. Our pension system, PERS, is the system that pays for the pensions for government employees once they retire. Most pension systems, state pension systems around the country, have been on shaky ground over the course of the last 10 years or so. And so Mississippi is no exception. I would say 5-ish years ago, my office asked the Pew Charitable Trusts, which has a pension expert team, to come to Mississippi and to do an analysis of our pension system and its financial health. And so what they found 4 or 5 years ago is our pension system in the long run will need more money. And so part of the reason is over the course of the last few years, the number of people working for the state government has gone down, but we have a huge number of retirees in the baby boomer generation that are drawing the pension dollars. And so part of the fix that the legislature crafted was to put into place a new tier, which is a new tier for our incoming employees that is going to pay out in a different way than the current tiers. And so the thought would be that that's going to save the state money in the long run. The pushback on that idea is that if you don't have as appealing of a pension, then you're going to have fewer people who want to work as teachers, as police officers, as anything in state government. So I think the jury's still out on the question of, will this thing save us money? Will it hurt our recruiting? And to what extent is it going to do both of those things? My guess, based on the numbers that I'm looking at and have seen, is that the pension system is still going to need an injection of cash at some point in the next 15 years or so. I will say that there has been a group of alarmists they're running around saying, well, the pension system is so bad it's going to collapse in the next couple of years. You need to know that that is not true. That's not going to happen. So my mom is a pensioner. She taught in Mississippi public schools for 35 years. And when these headlines started bubbling up, she asked me, are my checks going to stop coming? And so for those people who depend on those checks, they need to know that the pension system is not going to collapse tomorrow. It's not going to collapse next year. In fact, if the pension system stopped collecting money in Mississippi and just continued paying out its pension payments, the system could survive for probably another decade at least. So the money's not going to run dry tomorrow. We just, in the long run, we're going to have to acknowledge that there is going to have to be a change to the system, or there's going to have to be an injection of cash. I think it's going to be an injection of cash. And above all, we have to make sure that we keep our promises to anybody who has worked in a public job, that when they took that job, they were promised that pension, and we're going to have to keep that promise at the end of the day.
And then Bo, more of a comment here. He says, back to our truck conversation. Just the beauty of podcasting is you're not really in a format. You can just kind of roll back and forth. He says, I unload farmer trucks and load feed trucks. 80% of the people driving don't know English and can't read, I think is what he means to say. And then he says, and farmers are the worst about putting someone incompetent behind the wheel. And he was curious to get your thoughts on that, Shad.
I think it's rampant, and he's got more industry specific experience than I do, certainly. But I think it's in all kinds of trucking, and you see that just from YouTube videos of trucking accidents where the driver is on the side of the road standing there after the accident and can't speak English. So my recommendation is, if you see that, report it to the State Highway Patrol, because a person who cannot read and understand English, cannot read road signs, cannot understand the instructions of somebody at a weight control center, a weight testing center, that person is a menace on the road. They cannot be on the road and be a safe driver. That's why the law is the way it is. And moreover, I think that our State Highway Patrol needs to take this issue very seriously now, especially after years of not really enforcing these rules. You've got to get these drivers out of commission. I've heard stories of drivers being pulled over, clearly not understanding English, being told they can't get back in the truck, but then the policeman drives off. And so what do you think the driver's going to do, the driver of the truck? He's going to get back in the truck. He's going to go on his way. You have to put that truck out of commission. We have to do what it takes to put that truck out of commission. So your friend who's chiming in, he's seeing the same things that we're seeing out on the road, unfortunately.
I'll add one more comment before we get to another question. Jay Robertson, friend of mine in Little Rock, Ole Miss guy, he says, Arkansas has done some work here to provide students, meaning college students, with an estimated break-even point when their degree pays for itself based on the major. I think that should be a prerequisite. That should be a requirement of every public institution in America to when a student enrolls and declares a major in whatever, this is your break-even point. This is what you have to have for this to make financial sense for you. Because like you said, and we all talk about this, it's true, so many kids, whether it's in-state schools or kids that go out of state or whatever, they're going into a large degree of debt to pay for a college education. And they need to know where the value is, right? If you're getting out of college and 3 years later you're making $150,000 and you're paying off, well then, hey man, go for it, right? I mean, congratulations, that's awesome, but they need to know that. And I think there's a lot of kids that are, I don't know about you guys, I catch myself defending that generation. I have 3 kids in it, I guess. A lot of those kids, it's not that they're lazy or they're trying to avoid a difficult major. They're literally going into it sort of naive, and then they're getting whacked across the face at 22. And a lot of us were naive at 18, if we're honest and look back on it. You're 18, 19 years old. You're living in the moment. You're not exactly thinking about, hey, what am I going to need when I'm 40? That's pretty common, right? If I'm in Norman on Saturday and I go into the student section at OU, they're not thinking 20 years down the road. They're thinking 20 minutes down the road. I mean, that's pretty common for all of us when we were that age.
I think it's a great idea. Georgia also has a website where you can go and you can type in what you're going to major in, and it can tell you what your expected salary will be when you graduate if you get a job in Georgia, and then what your expected salary would be if you left Georgia and took a job somewhere else in the nation where that job pays the highest. And so at least you're getting data in front of these kids to where they can make those kinds of decisions, or at least look at it. The thing that I get frustrated with is the same thing you just said, Neal. You've got 18-year-olds who may not be thinking hard about their long run future. So, really it is incumbent on policymakers to think about what are the high value degree programs and really funneling the money to those and making those as appealing as possible and giving them as many seats as possible. And what I see in Jackson, at least, is everyone gets really queasy as soon as you start talking about changing anything at universities. As soon as you say the words, well, why is it that you can go get a minor in queer studies? Why is that allowed? Why is that something that we're funding with taxpayer dollars? And everybody gets real nervous because they don't want to say those words and they don't want to criticize anybody. And it is incumbent upon policymakers to actually talk about the programs and whether or not they're valuable. And what I see, especially among the political establishment, is they don't want to engage in any kind of debate where they might be called a bigot or they might get something negative said about them on Facebook. And they definitely don't want to make anybody at the university mad, because they want to keep getting free football tickets to go to Oxford on Saturdays. I mean, that's the bottom line. There are just a lot of politicians who are afraid to criticize universities because they feel like there's nothing to gain from it. Well, it's our job to question whether or not we're doing right by the taxpayers and doing right by these students. And so I'm going to continue talking about what's going on at the universities and at least being honest and being blunt about how we're spending money, so that ideally at the end of the day, we make good decisions that generate a high ROI for taxpayers and give kids the best chance to get into a degree program that's actually going to make their lives better.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too that doesn't get enough attention is like, I mean, this would have to happen on a federal level, but we really need some kind of reform to like student loans. Because student loan, the fact that you can't discharge a student loan in bankruptcy means that, like, a lender is willing to fund anything, right? Well, and first of all, like the primary lender has become the federal government. But the point is like that inability to discharge that debt makes it so that like nothing that you do, like, so if you go and you get a degree and you can't pay it, like, well, you file bankruptcy, you can't get out from under that. If you were allowed to discharge it in bankruptcy, this would change things, because the
100%.
screening process up front would be you go in to get the student loan and it's like, okay, but what are you going to get your degree in? Right. And what is it, and so even if the student is not looking at the information about here's what I make in this major, here's what I make in this major, that sort of thing, like the people giving out those loans are certainly going to be looking at it, because they're not going to want to make an investment in somebody if they think that like that person's eventually going to file bankruptcy and to get out from under the debt. And so,
or if someone did lend it, they would understand the risk.
Right. Yeah. Right. And that's the thing, is that would be incorporated. The problem is that we have all of these rules because we don't like, they don't want to prioritize, they don't want to be seen as prioritizing certain majors over others. They don't want to act like, students are getting fewer choices or something like that. Like, these are the kind of things that that prevent them from making those changes. But we're going to have to see some of that, because the issue is that you have people who are showing up and nobody's telling them, hey, if you do this, like, there's no way that you're going to pay this back. Right. Like the person who, the person who grows up and is like, gets amazing grades in some small school in Mississippi and then goes to Stanford to become like an elementary school teacher. Like, they're not going to be able to pay back that debt. As much as we like appreciate the fact that they're an elementary school teacher, and as much as we might appreciate them coming back to Mississippi and being an elementary school teacher after going to Stanford, right? Like that the finances just aren't going to work there, right? Like the cost is going to make it so that you're paying this debt forever,
literally the rest of your life.
And that's for something where you actually are getting a job afterwards, and the job that you know what you're getting into for the most part, right? Like now you imagine somebody who's going into something and something sounds interesting and they're like, oh, maybe I'll do this. And now all of a sudden they get done with the program and they have all of this debt. And now they're like, oh, how am I ever going to pay this back? Because I'm looking at these jobs and I can't, and I can't figure it out. I mean, I had a student, I got to be careful here because I don't want to dox the student, but I had a student come to my office like about a year ago, who wanted to add economics as like a double major. And I asked, like, why do you want to do this? And they said, well, the major that I'm in right now, like the people who do really well, like they make really good money. And they're like, but I knew somebody who was in this major last year and their job pays them about the same amount that I get paid to be a waitress on the square. And if that's what I'm going to get out of that major, I might as well just quit school and just work even more hours on the square, right? And which, I mean, that, it makes sense. And so she was like, I feel like if I got a degree in economics, like I would be more marketable when I go on the job market. And I think that I would learn like certain skills. And I think, first of all, I was very impressed because you don't get a lot of students who come to you with like, who are already thinking about that, like at like 19 years old.
Right.
You don't get a lot of people who are already thinking like that. But the thing is that, it's our job to create the incentives to think like that for the students, right? Because we can't expect, 18-year-old kids to show up and have their entire future, planned out and ready to go and knowing exactly, oh, I want to do this. This is what it's going to cost. This is, this is the loan I'm going to have to take out. This is the income I'm going to have to earn to pay that back. Like a lot of them just aren't going to do that. And also a lot of them, frankly, if they're going into programs where they're not going to be able to make it back, like nobody has an incentive to tell them that, right? Because their job sort of depends on bringing in majors, and then if the majors are not,
lure them into the trap,
right? And then
that's what that is. Yeah, it's wrong.
Yeah,
I mean, it's what it is. There's no other word for it. It's wrong. You know that you're getting kids into a degree plan that they're going to leave with a degree and no job prospects of note. And when you know that ahead of time and then you let the kids continue to do it, you just opened the door and watched them walk through the trap. That doesn't feel like that shouldn't be the job of higher education. The job of higher education should be to produce graduates who get good jobs, who then go out and basically give you free advertising so that you get a consistently better level of student. And the whole experience on your campus becomes better because you're surrounded by intelligent peers and there's growth consistently. That would make sense if it was a private business model. That would be the goal.
I hear the same thing from people that the absence of an underwriting process basically means that loans are so freely available that there is no adult checking to see if this is going to be a valid or valuable choice for each individual student. I'm curious, Josh, what you think about this too. I mean, I've also heard the argument that just the widespread availability of federally subsidized loans for students also contributes to this, because if you can get a loan to go do a federally subsidized loan to go do any major, then you might go pick an easy major, or you might go pick a major that just sounds kind of cool as opposed to one that's slightly more practical. I do think that the federal government, or at least the Trump administration, believed that was an issue, a problem, because you did see in the One Big Beautiful Bill that federally subsidized loans for certain majors are going to be cut out after they start looking at the salaries that those majors earn. So do you perceive that as a problem? If so, what are the potential fixes there? And what do federal policymakers need to be thinking about if they're going to fix that system?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like when you make something, if you make something less expensive, you get more of it, right? Like and I think that this is part of the issue is that making something less affordable can be good because you're potentially providing like a student, from who was born to low income parents, like the opportunity to do something they would never have the opportunity to do without that. But at the same time, it's not it's not clear that this would necessarily need to be something that's like universal, right? Like it doesn't necessarily mean that like, oh, we're willing to give you this subsidized loan for, for anything that you're doing, right? Like conceivably it should be based on, something. I mean, like one of the things that I've heard people say is that, that's kind of related to this student loan stuff is actually go to like an equity model, right? Where somebody funds you and then like they actually just get like a percentage of your income when you get a job, for a certain amount of time. Right. So, they give you a particular amount of money, then they get like and then kind of like they're investing in you, right? Like, and so, but I mean, that's the kind of the thing is it's just a matter of like realigning incentives, because when you make something, when you make something cheaper, people are going to consume more of it, but also of the things that are easier to do, you're going to get even more of it, right? If that makes sense, right? Yeah. So like you can make something difficult cheaper and fewer people are going to take you up on it, right? If you make something easy cheaper, many more people are going to take you up on it. And that's not to say that all, majors it's not to say that the sort of the difficulty of the major is correlated with, is necessarily correlated with income in the end. But I think that, there is a correlation there, but I think that this is something that you should, that you have to pay attention to. And it's something that, well, and it also too is like, there's no incentive for people to not create programs that produce zero value. Like there's no incentive to like, to not do that. Like if you just want to create a program that doesn't create value, like who's going to stand up and say, no, we shouldn't do this? Because what your argument is this is about academic freedom. And what they're, and then you can kind of argue like, it's not really increasing the cost, right? It's just allowing people to reallocate their resources and reallocate their time. Right. And so if you,
feels like you're speaking from experience here.
Well, I mean, the other thing too is like a huge problem at universities is that universities try to govern by consensus. And if you govern by consensus, you govern by false consensus. Because what happens is that people who are opposed to things, like they don't want to speak up, because if they speak up about something, they're afraid that somebody else is going to then retaliate later. Right? Like everybody's like operates on this sort of tit for tat strategy, right? As long as you're nice to me and you let my stuff get through, I'll be nice to you and let your stuff get through. And the problem is that there are instances of things that are very, very clearly unpopular that get like unanimously approved because like nobody speaks up. And so you just do a voice vote, and then you do a voice vote, and then, there's no opposition because nobody wants to be the lone voice going, nah, like, I don't think so. Yeah. And so I think that's another issue too, is that, it's a demand side issue, but it's also a supply side issue, right? Like the federally funded student loans or the federal subsidies for loans, right? Like those are increasing the demand for some of these things, but also like you can't have a demand for something if there's not a supply of that thing, right? And so, that's another sort of aspect, is that there has to be somewhere where the buck stops, right? There has to be somebody like who has veto power. There has to be somebody who can, and not only that, like it has to be a person who's willing to do it, right? Like, it has to be somebody who's willing to spend the political capital occasionally, right? To say, hey, this might be popular, but we're not going to do it. Or this might have had unanimous approval, but I don't think it's valuable. If you don't have that capability, and or if you have that capability and you don't exercise it, well, then you're not constraining supply. And as long as you're not constraining supply, then you're gonna have this issue as well.
Got about 15, 20 minutes left. I want to get both of y'all's thoughts on a much bigger picture thing. I don't remember what podcast I was listening to driving to and from Georgia. It may have been Rogan. It may have been Tucker Carlson. It may have been a national radio show. I don't remember. But there was a lot of talk about the current redistricting efforts throughout the country and how that's changing the numbers politically. Shad, you're in government. What are your thoughts on what's happening with these? I guess it's more national redistricting, but it's affecting Mississippi as well. What's happening there? What do you anticipate the end result being?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look nationally, it's obvious to me that Democrats have benefited a great deal from redistricting. So for example, we'll just use Connecticut as an example to compare to Mississippi. Connecticut in the last election, about 42-ish% of Connecticut residents voted for Donald Trump, but they have no members of Congress that are Republican. Every single seat is drawn to be a blue seat. So here in Mississippi, Kamala Harris got less than that. She got less than 42% of the vote here in Mississippi, but we have 4 congressional districts and 1 very solidly blue district, which is basically gerrymandered and drawn for Benny Thompson, District 2. So if you look nationwide, Democrats have benefited a lot from gerrymandering, and I think that's why you saw the Trump administration push certain states where there are a ton of seats, like Texas, to redistrict in order to increase the number of Republicans that are coming from those states. And I think what they would say, Texans and the Trump administration, they would say we're trying to make the districts fairer, and that is naturally going to result in more Republicans. So that's been kind of phase 1 of the redistricting effort. And some states like California are trying to push back and redistrict themselves to create even more blue seats. So that's kind of that piece of what's going on. And then there's a second piece, which is a challenge to the Voting Rights Act. So the Voting Rights Act, old piece of federal law, and the way that act has been interpreted over the years is that certain states like Mississippi have to draw a specific district for black voters specifically. And so that's why you have that Benny Thompson district. If you read the plain language of the Voting Rights Act, and I realize this gets a little bit lawyerly and nerdy, but if you read the plain language of the Voting Rights Act, it is not obvious to me that statute actually requires that. It really just requires that there be a fair process that does not privilege one racial group over the other. And so Louisiana took that side of the debate, and they said, no, you know what, the way this VRA, the Voting Rights Act, has been interpreted in the past is just wrong. We should not be forced to carve out these special districts for racial minorities. And so they're challenging that at the U.S. Supreme Court in a case called Louisiana v. Calais. And so that case was just heard recently. The ruling will probably come down next summer or so. Some people are saying maybe June-ish of next summer. But if the Supreme Court, which is now much more conservative than it was 15 and 20 years ago, if the Supreme Court comes back and says, Louisiana, you're correct, we do not need to be requiring districts to be drawn around racial lines, you'll see multiple states across the country who will have the opportunity to draw simpler, fairer districts that aren't snakes wandering along the Mississippi River, but are instead blocks.
Based on geography, right?
It would be much more based on geography, keeping cities whole inside those districts. And what you would see if you did that in Mississippi is you probably would see 4 districts that would be more likely to vote Republican. You'd also see the same thing in Louisiana and South Carolina and multiple other states where the Voting Rights Act, the VRA, has basically forced some gerrymandering to happen. So it's a big, huge sea change that could happen, and we will probably know next summer or so, somewhere in there, if those seats will change. If that ruling does come down in that way, you could see as many as 19 or 20 seats change from being drawn specifically for Democrats to being drawn in a way that's just simpler, and you'll get a different vote as a result.
The extrapolation on this, if I recall correctly, was this is one of the reasons, not to get overly political here, this is one of the reasons that some of the far left have become more are advocating more violence, frankly, because they view if this happens, they're going to have fewer seats in Senate, certainly fewer seats in the United States House, and that this is leading to this just sense of anger. It was just kind of a supposition, a theory that was placed out there. But the argument was what Shad just said, essentially, which is redistricting by geography where it makes sense is a common sense approach that would lead to more people being properly represented in Congress.
Well, and
which was the point of what the founding fathers set up.
Well, and also like the issue is that what we're seeing right now is a lot of like what the Trump administration has done and then sort of empowered other Republicans to do is to actually play a tit for tat strategy right? So like the idea is like, oh, if you're going to do this, then we're going to do it too. And I think that, and so I think like that's kind of the thing is that, you know, once somebody starts drawing, you know, weird districts on a map for their own political benefits, like they should expect that when their opponents get in office that they're going to redraw things in a weird way to benefit themselves, right? And that because the only stable equilibrium is where we agree not to do that, or where we just do that every cycle, every election cycle, and whoever's in power gets to redraw things. Because the, you know, once you start taking some power and abusing it, the only way for the other side to stop you from abusing that power a lot of times is either to take away the power or to just exercise the power themselves until, you know, you have to come to a détente.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, Americans who voted for Donald Trump, they were voting for somebody who's going to fight. And you know, I think they felt that Republicans too frequently had been, you know, pulling a knife at a fight, and then Democrats pull a gun, and then Republicans run away, and they wanted somebody who would fight back. But to go back to your point, Neal, you know, if you ask this big question of, you know, why is Congress so polarized? Why can't Democrats and Republicans compromise on anything? Well, it's because we've drawn some crazy districts where only a Democrat can get elected. And so what do you think is going to happen? You're going to get crazy Democrats elected in those districts, and then you're going to get Republicans who are elected in the others. So imagine in Mississippi if you had just 4 very simple districts drawn with horizontal lines, east to west lines, up and down the state. You know, and imagine if one of those districts, instead of being a district where, you know, it snakes along the Mississippi River and juts out in random places and is drawn for a Democrat to win, imagine if it were a district that had Greenville on this side of the state and it stretched all the way across rural Mississippi and had Starkville over here. If you're representing that district, you might be in like a soft Republican district, but you would also have to do things to appeal to black and white voters in Greenville, and you would have to appeal to suburban voters in Starkville. And so you might be a much more compromise-oriented congressman than, say, somebody who is going to Congress who just wanted to throw bombs every day. So, like, having common sense districts actually can generate better results in Congress if we have the willingness to do it.
Yeah, you know, Shad, it's interesting as you said that. What was going through my mind was a conversation that you have with people sometimes, like, you know, it's holiday times, you're sitting around with family and stuff, and you watch the news, and the news tells us how much we all hate each other, and then you go to Larson's, and you have a completely different experience. Like, you walk in, and there's people of all sorts of different socioeconomic categories, whites, blacks, Hispanics, and nobody seems to be actually actively hating each other. And you're like, wait a minute, there's a disconnect here. You know, we were in Maine not so long ago, and I'd found a bar to watch the end of the Cubs Padres game 3, and there was some people in there waiting for the Red Sox Yankees game to come on, and you know, they're like, where are you from? And I'm like, Mississippi. And they're like, how are you a Cubs fan? And I'm having the conversation. You look up and you're having this conversation with people that, you know, that's a blue state. I'm in a red state. We're supposed to be at odds, you know, and I think it's flawed, and I think it's intentional, and I think it should be undone. It is not, we're not a country that all sits around and hates each other. I mean, I saw it like in Athens the other day. I mean, yeah, you have people that are wearing Ole Miss stuff and people that are wearing Georgia stuff, but, you know, they all stand and sing the same anthem. I mean, you know, Ole Miss people are going to go to Oklahoma this weekend, and they're going to hang out, and for 3.5 hours, they're going to hate each other. But for the most part, those are kind of similar people, really. I mean, I think it's foolish. I think it's destructive, and you know, it was done for political power. I get it, but the results of that have created an animus that I don't think actually exists in reality, or doesn't naturally. Maybe it becomes that because propaganda fuels it. I know I'm getting kind of deep here, but I don't think that animus exists organically.
And I do think there's something to be said about getting along with one another civilly. What I think we emphasize too much in America is being nice to one another face to face. And then, a lot of times people will run to their keyboards or run to their favorite cable news network and get ginned up that way. But one of the reasons we get so ginned up is that we are not willing to have civil disagreements. And, I grew up in rural Mississippi, a town of 700 people. So, my values are very conservative. I went off to law school at Harvard, had a ton of friends who were super liberal. But the friends that I connected with the most were ones where we could disagree civilly because they knew that when I disagreed with them and did so respectfully, it was a sign that I valued them as a person. I wanted to hear what they thought about it. I was willing to have a conversation with them. And when somebody could engage with me that way, I thought the same about them. And so we've got to find a way to get back to being civil with one another. It doesn't mean being nice and agreeing with the other person every single time and saying, yeah, you're doing great and I agree with everything you said. It's about civilly and in good faith disagreeing and having a competition of ideas so that our country can flourish. That to me is a bedrock principle that we got to get back to.
All right, I got to ask you. You probably get mad at me, but I'm not being a good journalist if I don't ask this. I know the answer. You're going to give me a coach speak answer of, "Hey, I'm one day at a time. I'm the state auditor. I'm focused on being the state auditor." I know. Just us guys. You're what are your political aspirations? You have a following. You're a young guy. What are you? About 40?
Yeah, turned 40 this year. Yeah, just turned 40.
Young guy. A lot of people are they like your thoughts. They like the way that you communicate those thoughts. What's possibly next for you?
I have on this side of my screen. I have Lane Kiffin's typical answers to press conference questions. One is trust the process. So I'm going to trust the process. I'll try not to venture into coach speak too much. I'll be as blunt as I know how to be. I'm the state auditor. I love doing this job. I for the last 7 years, have really enjoyed finding waste and brokenness in state government. I think that there are a lot of people who are sort of frustrated with our political establishment for not addressing the biggest challenges, not speaking bluntly about the biggest challenges that we have at the state. And we talked about some of them at the university level. And so for that reason, because I think we need honest leadership that is going to tackle some of these big challenges, get the waste out of state government, get money to where it needs to go, I've been clear that I'm thinking about running for governor in the next election cycle, which is 2 years away. So we're not at that point right now where it's time to make a decision. So I'm going to continue to think about it and pray about it and talk about it with my family. But somebody has to step up, and they have to address the biggest problems that we have as a state. I mean, we've got a group of politicians who are so afraid of confronting hard truths, and I'm very disappointed in a bunch of them. And I just think that people are ready for something different. They're ready for somebody who is going to step up and address those big things that we know need to be addressed. And so I'm thinking about it and going to continue to pray about it. And when the day comes, I will come back to the Josh Hendrickson Show and we'll figure out how to announce. Yeah.
Go. That's what I wanted to hear. That's good. That's good. That's more than you get out of Lane, honestly. I mean,
I need to dial it back then. That's the answer. I got to dial something back.
Anything else from you, Josh, here at the end?
We were what's your does Ole Miss make the playoffs?
I really want to answer that question after this Saturday, obviously.
Well, yeah.
Because I just think that this is the game. If you had asked me at the beginning of the season to circle a loss, I would have just circled Georgia real fast. And I think we performed well for 3 quarters, and I didn't leave the game thinking, gosh, we're done. We're toast. I didn't think that at all. But going to Oklahoma against a good team, I don't know. I want to be optimistic and say that we can pull it out, and that puts us on the right side of going to the playoffs.
I think Saturday, and I've said this to some people, and people just read way too much into it, and I get it. I think Saturday is the most potentially consequential game of Lane Kiffin's 6 years at Ole Miss. Because if they win, they have a real shot at 11-1. 11-1 means you're going to get in some tiebreaker system where the league's going to look up and go, gosh, and send 2 teams to Atlanta. And frankly, you might not even want to be one of those 2 teams. So you would, in this hypothetical, let's say they don't win the playoff. They don't win to get to Atlanta. They get left out as one of the 3 or 4 11-1 teams. They'd host a game in Oxford on December 19th or 20th. And if you won that game, and Ole Miss has been winning a lot of its home games, you're playing probably in the Cotton Bowl or the Sugar Bowl on New Year's Day. Well, obviously that's great for your program. You're in the national quarterfinals at that point. And potential suitors for Lane Kiffin, they might not be willing to wait till January 1, especially with the portal opening on January 2 and the high school class now signing in December. A loss to Oklahoma. A couple of things. One, it's just the drain of it. With all the Florida stuff pops up, you could see how you could be distracted and lose one of these last games. And even if you won them all, look, the resume's kind of weak. If LSU ends up being an 8-4 team, a 7-5 team, South Carolina ends up being a 6-6, 5-7 team, Kentucky goes winless in the league, Arkansas and Mississippi State, they play each other. So one goes 1-7, the other goes 0-8. The Citadel's 1-6. Georgia State's 1-6. I mean, you don't have any meat on the bone, and if you get if you get a big crowd of 10-2, and somebody has to get squeezed out, you would be a leading target to get squeezed out because people would say, well, who did you beat? So I think this is a monumentally big game.
No, I agree.
I was waiting for you to say. Yeah, there's these people that do, and I did it for a long time until we got into it, and I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, hey, 10 wins gets you in, and it's like we're basing this on 1 year of sample size. Like, that's just not a big sample size there. You know, I mean, even at Ruston High School, they taught us that 1 year was a small sample size. That's all they taught us. We learned that.
Neal, I know you did this in the last podcast or maybe 2 ago, but what's your update on Lane Kiffin and what happens?
Florida wants him, and I think he wants to listen. And people hear that and they go, "Oh, he wants to leave." No, it means he wants to listen. And I get it. Now, if I were him, I would want to have a conversation. I would have real questions. Why did Dan Mullen fail? Dan Mullen did not fail at Mississippi State. He's not failing at UNLV. I think Dan's a really good coach. Why did Dan Mullen fail at Florida? Why was he not accepted at Florida? Jim McElwain, very well thought of in coaching circles, and went on to Central Michigan and won. Why did he fail? Billy Napier is incredibly well thought of in the coaching business. Coaches think highly of Billy Napier. He won very big at Louisiana Lafayette. Big, dominated the Sun Belt. And since he left, they've fallen off. They're no longer dominating the Sun Belt. Billy's a really good coach. In fact, when Billy was at Alabama as part of Nick Saban's staff with Lane Kiffin and Kirby Smart and all these others, I mean, he had a really quality staff. There were a lot of people that said, hey, Billy Napier is the most like Nick Saban. That's what they say, and so I would have questions. Why did Billy Napier fail so badly at Florida? Now, people like Lane have, when I say ego, I don't mean it in a negative way. They just have extremely high levels of confidence in themselves to where it's very easy for them to go, well, I'm so good that I'll kill it. And he might be right. But he has to get those answers. And look, Shad, if you told me that, hey, I don't want to agree to a great big extension right now that locks me in. I want to see what the landscape holds. Maybe LSU opens up. Maybe Texas opens up. Maybe something happens where DeBoer leaves Alabama to go to the NFL. he's going to get paid one way or the other. And so the incentive to just lock himself into an 8-year deal at Ole Miss or something, as much as fans want him to do that, and I understand it,
It's just not there.
I see where he's coming from to go, because I think here's his problem, and I think this is the thing that Ole Miss is going to have to get past with him ultimately, is I think there's a part of him that looks at games like last weekend against Georgia and goes, every year if I stay at Ole Miss, there's 2 or 3 of those games where I go into those games against elite coaching staffs, and they have more weapons than I've got. And if the two sides are operating at peak efficiency and you've got fewer great players, your opportunity to win is still there, as you saw Saturday, but it's smaller. Your path is smaller. And so, he's a guy that, he just wants to win he wants to win a championship bad. He worked for Pete Carroll. He worked for Nick Saban. Those are championship guys that had dynasties at USC and Alabama respectively. And I mean, I'm sure there's a part of him at 50, 51 years old that he wants to do that. I mean, it's like people think that the whole saying he loved Ole Miss and loves Oxford and all that stuff is false. I don't think it's false. I'm a firm believer in two things can be true at the same time, that he does love those places and that Oxford was great for him or is great for him. And at the same time, you do wonder, is there another opportunity where the ability to win a championship is more abundant?
I was just trying to figure out how many people I needed to audit in Florida in order to prevent this from happening. Stretch my jurisdiction a little bit.
Yeah.
We'll see.
That feels
hopefully
like
it stays.
Yeah, that feels like that might be a misuse of your power, but I understand. Hey, college football's
get a lot of votes in Oxford. I mean, you got to please the people.
You would. And it's like AJ McCarron the other day when I was making fun of the Auburn job. And, AJ has some political aspirations that I think you'll hear about soon. And he said, "Hey, come on, you can't talk about Auburn like that." Former Alabama quarterback.
Well, that's how you know you're running for office, right there.
Yeah, right there. I was like,
friendly to Auburn now.
I was like, you're so full of it. Hey, I really appreciate the time, Shad. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate y'all.
Thanks. Josh, thank you. That does it for this edition of the Josh Hendrickson Show. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. We'll see what's there's be some kind of election day stuff. We actually hadn't talked elections since the last couple of years. We'll talk about that stuff and whatever else comes up. I hope everybody has a great weekend. Thanks for being with us in the stream. We will talk to you again soon.